And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our first speaker, Dan Hoxworth with Capstone Community Action.
Thank you, Dan, for the opportunity to participate in this prestigious panel. Capstone is really devoted toward creating environmentally and economically sustainable households and communities, so it's a privilege to be here and to be here with Representative Copeland Hanses, who has been a leader in ensuring efficiency in Vermont and helped us increase our investments in 2016 for the Weatherization Assistance Program that Capstone, along with other CAPS, is pleased to administer in the state. 6 years ago, on August 28, 2011, Vermont felt the brunt of climate change when Superstorm Irene battered the state with torrential rains and high winds. In this area, the White River did major damage along with other tributaries of the Connecticut River. It took tremendous energy and resources for Vermont to rebound from the devastating impact of that storm. Many of those impacted were economically vulnerable Vermonters. For these Vermonters, Irene was personally devastating, and some are still coping with the aftermath of that storm. Why is this so? Because low-income Vermonters are often most impacted by climate change. In other words, climate change is regressive. First, let me elaborate on the ways that climate change is regressive. Vermonters with low income suffer the greatest consequences from the violent storms and volatile weather, be it Superstorm Irene, Superstorm Sandy, or the next one. Why? Because they are the first hit. As they live in risk-prone locations, they often don't have a choice of their location where they have a home. It's the most affordable place to live. The worst hit, as they live in the most vulnerable structures. Mobile homes don't survive very well in major storms. They are the slowest to recover, if they ever do, from these weather events, as we saw in the aftermath of Superstorm Irene. Yet the impact of climate change and our carbon-based economy does not stop there. Economically vulnerable Vermonters face the greatest financial burden from our carbon-based economy. They are the most vulnerable to price spikes in food and fuel due to climate-related events and carbon fuel price volatility. They have no capacity to financially absorb the additional costs. Often they drive out away from job centers to find the affordable housing, as I mentioned, and they are forced to commute, therefore, longer distances. And they are energy poor. They spend an inordinately amount of their income on fuel for their home and transportation. They are also the most negatively impacted by the health risk inherent in our carbon-based economy. Low-income communities are often closer to carbon emissions from roads and industry, and thereby suffer the most from air pollution and soil degradation, with often severe health effects. Yes, climate change is regressive, yet we can address that in Vermont. We can achieve economic fairness and environmental justice. We can lead the nation. Here's how. First, we must put the same effort and resources to transportation efficiency that we have in reducing energy use residentially, commercially, and industrially. We must create transportation choices throughout Vermont, and most importantly, ensure they are accessible and affordable to low and moderate income Vermonters. We have made great progress and significant investments in energy efficiency. This must continue. Yet, as a state, we have no coherent strategy or plan for increasing transportation efficiency. This is crucial. Indeed, the report, Mapping Total Energy Burden in Vermont, recently issued by Efficiency Vermont, lays bare an unfortunate truth about our state. While we lead the nation in energy innovation, we're doing no better than the rest of the country in helping low-income households lighten their disproportionate energy burden. Residents of our poorest communities are paying more than a quarter of their total income on energy, while residents in our richest communities are paying less than 5%.
Can you say the numbers again?
Sure. Residents of our poorest communities are paying more than a quarter of their income on energy, while residents in our richest communities are paying less than 5%. We can do better. We must do better. We must move aggressively on creating both transportation efficiency and transportation choices to ensure that we don't burden low-income Vermonters as we tackle our economic and moral duty to combat climate change. This is not an either-or. This is a both-and. Second, we must continue to invest in weatherization for low-income households. The Weatherization Assistance Program that is highly effective results in a 20 to 25% reduction in energy use per home, providing an annuity of savings to the homeowner and the occupant, or the occupant. Even more important than that is the dramatic improvement in indoor air quality. Thus, the program not only significantly reduces the use of carbon-based fuels, it also creates healthier environments for occupants, particularly children, and is seen as a very effective way of reducing the incidence of childhood asthma. While the state of Vermont has invested tremendously in this program, we are still way behind the state's goal of 20,000 low-income Vermonters homes weatherized by 2020. We just reached the 11,000 plateau this year. We have much work to do to address low-income households and incentivize energy efficiency and weatherization in homes owned by Vermonters also with moderate incomes. But now let me turn my attention to another solution, and that's a carbon pollution tax. As Ronald Reagan said, if you want more of something, subsidize it. If you want less of something, tax it. Well, for years we have subsidized our carbon-based economy and encouraged carbon pollution by not pricing it. Carbon pollution affects every Vermonter. It affects low-income Vermonters the most, so let's tax it. Let's put a price on carbon pollution and use market forces to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. It's a progressive thing to do. It also uses a very conservative principle. Indeed, the Climate Leadership Council came out with their recommendation in February 2017 called the conservative case for carbon dividends, how a new climate strategy can strengthen our economy, reduce regulation, help working class Americans, shrink government, and promote national security. Who's on that? James A. Baker, former Chief of Staff for both Presidents Reagan and George H.W. Bush. George P. Shultz, Secretary of State under President Reagan. And Henry Paulson, Jr., Secretary of the Treasury under George W. Bush, among the 8 authors of that study. In it, they recommend a gradually increasing carbon tax, a carbon dividend for all Americans. They strongly assert that a carbon tax would send a powerful market signal that encourages technological innovation and large-scale substitution of existing energy and transportation infrastructures, thereby stimulating new investment. I agree with their assessment. So what would a carbon pollution tax achieve for our state and residents? It would spur consumer demand for innovative transportation alternatives and further encourage innovation. It would transition us away from the inefficient combustion engine. In other words, let's stop driving furnaces. It would further encourage local renewables as an energy source. It would spur the growth of our climate energy economy that we're here to talk about tonight, creating even more sustainable jobs that contribute to our environment rather than destroy it. It would serve as a model for other states to follow and thereby further establish Vermont as a leader in sustainability and the environment, thereby attracting more young people to live, work, and play here. Over time, it would improve the health of Vermonters through better air quality, water quality, and less environmental degradation. It would also reduce the risk and impact on low-income Vermonters from weather-related disasters. And finally, if designed correctly, it could create a more progressive, and equitable tax system in Vermont. So the one thing we have to consider for low-income Vermonters when we go to create a carbon pollution tax is that they need timely cash flow, and they're likely to be impacted the most. So any sort of solution has to provide some cash flow back to them to help offset the cost of that tax. There are many varieties that have been proposed, and I'm sure that others on the panel may address these in a more detailed level. But I will say that in the Climate Leadership Council, they came out with a recommendation that there be a carbon dividend for all Americans. And I think that's something to be considered, a carbon dividend for all Vermonters. Only I would make it progressive so that it slowly declines as incomes go up. But it's something we can consider. And if it came back quickly in an efficient way, then low-income Vermonters would be able to work with us and stay with us as we transition to a new economy, which is really what we're trying to do here, one that isn't carbon-based. The reason we need a more progressive tax structure is that, according to the Public Assets Institute, the top 1% of Vermont pays the lowest on state and local taxes, under 8% of income in 2015, while the lowest 40% pay nearly 9% of their income. I strongly believe that any tax reform must make the tax system in Vermont more progressive to reduce the burden on low and moderate income Vermonters. Finally, Vermont is already seen as a leader in energy efficiency, having created the first energy efficiency utility in the United States, in Efficiency Vermont. A carbon pollution tax would solidify our state's reputation as a leader in addressing climate change. For millennials, like my two sons, they want to be a part of achieving these goals. By establishing a carbon pollution tax, Vermont would reinforce its brand as a leading state in creating a sustainable, renewable economy. This brand will be a draw to the very young people we need to replenish and expand our workforce as my generation moves toward retirement. Again, Vermonters want a healthier, more equitable and affordable state, and we can achieve the goal of 90% renewables in 2050. We can move down that road by creating a comprehensive transportation strategy that provides more affordable transportation options for all Vermonters, and yes, a carbon pollution tax would be a powerful tool to achieve both a progressive tax structure and a greener Vermont. So I encourage you tonight to work to build a stronger climate change economy in Vermont, and I am confident that with your support and effort, that your grandchildren and mine will benefit from our collective wisdom and look back favorably on our legacy. Thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts with you.